It started as a whisper. Then a murmur. Then a deafening silence. A transmission had spread across the galaxy, hijacking every comm network, overriding every broadcast, forcing itself onto every screen from the lowest slums to the grandest palaces. The Galactic Empire wanted everyone to watch. The footage began with a view of a massive execution platform. A colossal arena on Vortilis Prime, the very heart of the Empire, where 70,000 human captives stood in neat, lifeless rows. Men, women, children. Entire families who had once called New Avalon their home, a human colony that refused to surrender. They had been given no trial. No last words. They were not prisoners of war. They were cattle, lined up for slaughter. The camera drones panned upward. From a towering balcony, Grand Imperator Zelkar Thoris surveyed the condemned. His golden war cloak shimmered, his reptilian features twisted into a smug grin. This was his show. His spectacle. And he wanted every being in the galaxy to know that he had won. His voice oozed with arrogance, broadcasted to trillions. Let this be a lesson to those who dare defy the Empire. He raised a single, clawed hand. The executioners activated. Blazing plasma cannons erupted. The first row of humans vanished in an instant, reduced to vapor before they could even scream. The second row fell. Then the third. Row by row, the massacre unfolded like a machine, precise, methodical, unrelenting. Mothers clutched their children as they burned together. A father tried to shield his wife, but there was no shielding from the inferno. A soldier, broken and bleeding, stared at the sky with empty eyes before his body became nothing but smoke. Humanity, so proud, so stubborn, was being erased in real time. The screams echoed through the Colosseum. Then, the final row. Standing among them, calm despite the horror, was Ambassador Callum Graves, Earth's highest diplomat to the Empire. Captured. Forced to watch. The drones hovered closer, as if expecting him to beg. Instead, he smiled. Not in fear. Not in surrender. But something else entirely. And then, he spoke. You do not understand what you've done. His voice was steady. Unshaken. They will come for you. Before the Imperator could scoff, before the drones could analyze the meaning of those words. A plasma bolt ripped through Graves' chest. His body crumpled. The last human fell. The execution was complete. Grand Imperator Zelkar Thoris turned to the camera, spreading his arms wide, his smile widening. And thus, humanity is broken. The transmission ended. Silence. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence of mourning. But the silence before annihilation. Earth's response. The Empire believed that humanity would weep. That they would plead. That they would accept their place. The Empire had never been more wrong. Within minutes, the broadcast was everywhere, ripping across Earth's networks like wildfire. The massacre played on repeat, on news feeds, in war rooms, on every single screen across the planet. Every human saw. Every human felt. And then? Humanity did not break. Humanity changed. World leaders, men and women who had spent decades bickering over politics, stood as one. Generals who once prepared for war against each other now prepared for something far greater. And then, a single message was broadcast back to the Empire. A message from General Marcus Voss, the supreme commander of Earth's unified military forces. He stood in front of a war map, every star system marked, every imperial stronghold highlighted. Targets. His voice was steel. The Empire believes this will frighten us. That we will kneel. That we will forget. A pause. Then his next words came. Words that would change history. We will not kneel. We will not forget. And we will show them exactly what they have unleashed. Enter the monsters. Earth's war machine roared to life. Weapons rolled off assembly lines faster than ever before. Warships were forged in orbit at breakneck speed. Supercomputers calculated battle strategies, while sleeper agents inside Imperial territory activated. But humanity knew war would take time. And time was something they would not grant the Empire. Instead, Earth sent something else. Something far worse. Kane. A name whispered in the darkest circles of Black Ops operations. A man who didn't exist. No files. No records. Just a trail of bodies across war zones that no one spoke of. He and his team were already moving. Elite killers. Ghosts in the dark. The kind of people the government pretended they didn't have. They weren't coming for war. They were coming for vengeance. One by one, the Empire's rulers would fall. Governors. Admirals. Generals. the executioners of New Avalon. And at the very top? The Imperator himself. Humanity's armies would come later. Kane would go first. And when he arrived, the Empire would finally understand fear. Panic was an emotion unbecoming of an empire. Yet, for the first time in centuries, fear gripped the most powerful figures in the galaxy. The massacre had been celebrated in Imperial High Command, at first. Grand Imperator Zelkar Thoris had toasted the execution, declaring it a new era of human subjugation. The senators had cheered. The generals had scoffed. And then, the first message arrived. No official response from Earth. No desperate plea. No diplomatic outrage. Instead, an intercepted transmission from an unknown source, traced back to a Black Ops relay deep within human space. The message was only 4 words. You should have listened. The Imperator dismissed it as human arrogance. But the second message arrived the next day. This time, it wasn't words. It was the corpse of Imperial Admiral Kavos, one of the men who had orchestrated the executions on Vortalis Prime. Found in his own palace. Surrounded by his personal guard, his security drones, his energy barriers. None of it mattered. Because someone had gotten in anyway. His body was displayed on his own dinner table, arms and legs bound, mouth forced open. A single human bullet was lodged inside his skull, a primitive yet personal touch. Next to the body, a datapad flashed a message on loop. 1 down. More to go. Imperial High Command erupted into chaos. How? How could this happen inside the very heart of the Empire? There were no energy weapons fired, no alarms triggered. The assassin had come and gone like a phantom. And the worst part? No one claimed responsibility. No faction. No formal declaration of war. No demands. This wasn't a counterattack. This was a manhunt. And they were the prey. Hell unleashed. The next death came only hours later. Imperial General Varkaruz, another architect of the massacre, was found hanging upside down from the balcony of his estate. His own entrails dripped onto the marble floor. His guards swore they had seen nothing. 1 minute, he was in his chambers. The next? Dead. No alarms. No witnesses. No mercy. And then, the killings escalated. The butchers of Vortalis, every commander, officer, or official who had played a role in the execution, were being hunted down one by one. One was found flayed alive inside his own escape pod, drifting through space. Another was discovered in his office, his throat slit so cleanly the blood had barely spilled from his body. A third was reduced to ashes when his personal shuttle mysteriously overloaded its core reactor mid-flight. Each death was precise, untraceable, terrifying. And with each new corpse, a single message was left behind, always written in human blood. You should have listened. The ghosts of Earth. The assassinations weren't random. They were surgical. Because this wasn't a war. This was extermination. And the Empire's executioners? They weren't facing an army. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were being hunted by something far, far worse. Kane and his team. Handpicked from the deadliest units humanity had ever produced. They were special forces operators without equal. Trained in wars the rest of the galaxy had never even heard of. Masters of stealth, sabotage, assassination. These weren't men who played by the rules of intergalactic warfare. These were the monsters Earth released when it wanted entire regimes to disappear overnight. And now, they had been given only one order. Kill them all. The Imperator's nightmare. Zelkar Thoris, once the most feared ruler in the galaxy, was now a prisoner inside his own palace. His inner circle had crumbled. His admirals, generals, and enforcers were being wiped out. One by one. Day after day. Some of them tried to flee to outer systems. Some activated entire battalions to guard them. It didn't matter. Kane and his team found them anyway. And they were getting closer. The Imperator couldn't sleep. Every shadow in his chamber felt like a threat. Every passing servant could be a hidden killer. The greatest empire in the galaxy, reduced to paranoia and fear. He had survived 5 assassination attempts in the past week alone. The latest had been the most chilling. His best bodyguard, a towering enforcer bred for war, had been found dead inside the throne room, his helmet caved in, his chest carved with the same message all the others had received. You should have listened. And then, the worst part. Security logs showed nothing. Nothing. No footage. No sign of an intruder. No alarms triggered. The killer had walked into the most heavily guarded place in the Empire and left without so much as a whisper. And that's when the Imperator finally understood. Humanity hadn't sent an army. They had sent the devil. The kill list narrows. The Empire was breaking. Entire military units were refusing orders. Governors were fleeing their posts. Citizens whispered in the streets of an unstoppable shadow, something that could not be stopped by fleets or armies. Panic spread through the highest levels of command. Because they knew. The butchers of Vortalis were almost all dead. And when they were gone, there was only one target left. The Imperator himself. The final warning. It came at exactly midnight, in the Imperator's personal chamber. A hollow silence filled the room. His security forces stood at full alert, energy rifles primed, the walls lined with automated sentry turrets. There was no way in. And yet, as the Imperator turned toward his desk, his blood turned to ice. Because something was sitting there. A small metal case. The guards saw nothing. The sensors detected nothing. And yet, it was there. With shaking hands, the Imperator opened it. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was a single human bullet. And attached to it? A note. A note that simply read, "See you soon." The Imperator's hands trembled. He could barely breathe. Because he knew. They weren't coming. They were already here. Grand Imperator Zelkar Thoris had ruled the galaxy with absolute power. His empire had crushed rebellions, enslaved worlds, and wiped out entire species. He had thought himself untouchable. Now, he sat in his war chamber, surrounded by his last surviving generals, watching the impossible unfold. The assassinations had been bad enough. His highest-ranking officers were dying in their own fortresses, despite being protected by legions of troops, energy shields, and security drones. But this was worse. Because now, it wasn't just silent killings. Now, the humans were making noise. The first strike. The Imperial fortress of Draskar 9 was supposed to be impregnable. A planet-sized citadel, protected by an entire fleet, armed with plasma batteries that could tear apart enemy ships before they even entered orbit. The heart of the Empire's military command structure. And then, in a single night, it was gone. The attack was unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. There were no warnings. No fleets dropping out of hyperspace. No warships engaging in orbital bombardment. Instead, a single stealth ship had slipped past the defenses, its crew small but deadly. They infiltrated the reactor core, bypassed the most advanced security systems in the galaxy, and detonated the primary energy grid. Draskar 9 didn't explode. It collapsed. Its entire structure caved in, metal burning and twisting as the planet-sized fortress imploded on itself, taking with it millions of the Empire's best warriors. And the humans left a message, etched into the ruined surface of the dead world. We do not forgive. The news spread like wildfire. Fear. Panic. Uncertainty. For the first time, the Empire's soldiers, the same warriors who had butchered 70,000 humans on live broadcast, were afraid. Because this wasn't just a war. This was retribution. Cain and the Art of Terror. Cain watched the destruction from orbit, arms crossed, face unreadable. He was a weapon, a man who had spent his life in the shadows, toppling regimes, dismantling armies, and hunting warlords. But this? This was personal. The Imperator had made a mistake. He thought butchering unarmed civilians would scare humanity. Instead, he had turned them into monsters. Cain turned to his second-in-command, a woman known only as Spectre, one of the deadliest snipers to ever live. "Next target," he asked, his voice like steel. Spectre smirked, pulling up a holographic map of the Empire's most critical locations. "The Gryzath shipyards," she said. "The biggest producer of Imperial warships. If we take it out, we cripple their fleet," Cain finished. Spectre nodded. Cain exhaled slowly, then tapped his comm. "All teams, prepare for insertion." The Empire's fleet, reduced to ash. The Gryzath shipyard stretched across an entire moon, a massive construction facility churning out thousands of warships at a time. It was guarded by elite forces. Titan-class dreadnoughts hovered in orbit. Defense platforms tracked every incoming vessel. Thousands of fighters patrolled the sector, ensuring nothing got through. And yet, the attack came from inside. Imperial officers barely had time to react before half their fleet went up in flames. Explosions rippled through the shipyard, as internal sabotage teams, human operatives who had infiltrated the facility months ago, triggered cascading meltdowns. Security footage caught brief glimpses of the attackers. Ghostly figures in black armor, moving with inhuman precision, gunning down entire squads before vanishing into the shadows. By the time the Empire realized what was happening, it was too late. The shipyard was collapsing. Admiral Krenvos, the officer in charge of the facility, desperately tried to evacuate. He never made it. His body was found floating in space, a bullet hole cleanly punched through his visor. And just like before, a message was left behind. This time, scrawled across the wreckage of the shipyard. You brought this on yourselves. The breaking point. The Empire was crumbling. The greatest military force in the galaxy, reduced to panic and paranoia. Imperial officers were abandoning their posts. Governors were fleeing their worlds, afraid of what was coming. Because they finally understood. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to avenge. To erase every last trace of the people who had slaughtered their own. And soon, there would be only one name left on their list. The Imperator. The Imperator's desperation. Zelkar Thoris was out of options. He had ordered his best warriors to track down the humans, but they vanished like ghosts after every attack. His admirals were dead. His fleets were burning. And now? They were coming for him. He issued an emergency order, broadcasting a desperate plea to every surviving Imperial stronghold. Seal the capital. Fortify the palace. Deploy every available unit. Do not let them in. He activated the planetary defense grid, surrounding the capital world with thousands of warships, anti-orbital cannons, and the last remnants of his once mighty legions. It was the most fortified position in the entire empire. No fleet could breach it. No army could invade. The Imperator clung to that hope. And then, the final message came through. A live transmission. From Kane. The screen flickered to life, revealing his face. Cold. Expressionless. Deadly. Imperator, Kane said, his voice calm. Zelkar Thoris swallowed, his claws digging into the armrests of his throne. You think your walls will save you, Kane continued. You think your armies will keep us out. A pause. Then Kane's eyes darkened. We are already inside. The transmission cut to black. A sudden crash echoed through the palace corridors. Gunfire. Screams. The Imperator's blood ran cold. Because he realized, far too late. The humans weren't coming for him. They were already here. The Imperial capital, once the most secure planet in the galaxy, was now a fortress under siege. Zelkar Thoris, the Grand Imperator, had deployed everything to defend himself. The skies above the planet burned with the fire of warships, Imperial fleets frantically scanning the void for the invisible enemy. The planetary defense grid was at full capacity, plasma turrets, missile silos, energy shields. On the ground, 1 million soldiers stood ready, their weapons primed, every entrance to the Imperial palace sealed shut. But it wouldn't matter. Because Kane and his team were already inside. The killers in the dark. The Imperator's personal guard had been trained from birth. Genetically enhanced, twice the size of an average warrior, their armor plated in unbreakable alloy. And yet, they were dying in silence. The first group of guards, stationed at the outer corridors, never saw it coming. One moment, they were patrolling. The next? Gunfire. Not the clean, controlled blasts of Imperial plasma rifles. No, this was something different. Something crude, ancient, but horrifyingly effective. Silenced rounds ripped through armor. Heads snapped back. Bodies dropped without a sound. By the time the Imperator's War Council realized the attack had already begun, half the palace was a graveyard. Security systems had been hacked. Cameras looped dead feeds. Automated sentries turned against their own troops. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. The humans weren't just breaking in. They were tearing the Empire apart from the inside. The throne room burns. The Imperator sat on his throne, gripping the armrests so tightly his claws cracked the stone. His last remaining generals stood beside him, their faces pale, their weapons drawn. The throne room doors were sealed with triple-layered blast shielding, guarded by his best warriors. Even with all that, he felt it, the creeping, suffocating fear clawing at his mind. And then, the lights flickered. A distant explosion shook the palace. Then another. And another. The screams of his soldiers echoed through the corridors, followed by the rattle of automatic gunfire. One by one, the vital security systems failed. And then, in the silence, a voice crackled through the Imperator's private comms. A single, calm voice. Kane. It's over. The Imperator's breath caught in his throat. You think you're powerful, Kane continued. You think your empire will last. A pause. Then. You don't understand, do you? The blast doors groaned. Then boom. They were blown inward, the force sending bodies flying like ragdolls. And there they stood. Kane. Spectre. The last ruthless humans Earth had sent. Their black armor dripped with blood. Their weapons smoking. Their movements silent, precise, unstoppable. The last of the Imperator's guards raised their weapons. But it didn't matter. Because Kane and his team opened fire first. The final moments. The battle was over in seconds. The Imperator's elite guards, the strongest warriors in the Empire, were slaughtered in a storm of bullets and blades. Spectre's rifle cracked. One shot, one kill, Imperial generals collapsed, their skulls bursting apart. Kane moved like a phantom, weaving through the chaos, knives flashing, slitting throats before his enemies could even react. The Imperator fell to his knees, his once golden robes now soaked in the blood of his own men. He had nowhere left to run. You should have listened. Kane stalked forward, gun leveled. The Imperator looked up at him, eyes wide, pleading. Wait, he gasped. Kane didn't wait. He pressed his pistol against the Imperator's forehead. For a moment, there was silence. Then Kane whispered the last words the Imperator would ever hear. You should have listened. Bang. The Imperator's skull exploded, his body crumpling onto the throne room floor. The ruler of the galaxy, dead, executed like an animal. The Empire was finished. But Kane wasn't done. He turned to the Imperator's throne, pulled a grenade from his belt, and primed it. Then, he tossed it onto the seat of power. A final message to the galaxy. Boom. The Imperial throne shattered into dust. The end of an empire. The fall of the Imperator was broadcasted across every Imperial world. There was no speech. No announcement. Just footage of his corpse, sprawled across the floor, and the flaming ruins of his palace. The message was clear. The humans had come. The Empire was over. Planets rebelled overnight. Imperial warlords surrendered, desperate to escape Kane's wrath. There would be no peace talks. No negotiations. Only punishment. Humanity had made one thing very, very clear. The next time the galaxy thought about attacking Earth, they would remember what happened here. And they would know true fear. Fire across the stars. The Imperator was dead. The Empire was broken. And the galaxy burned with fear. News of the Imperator's execution spread faster than light. His body, once seated on a throne of absolute power, had been left rotting in the ruins of his palace. His death was not ceremonial. Not dignified. It was a warning. And the galaxy understood it. The Imperial war machine, once feared across the stars, now lay in ruin. There was no command structure anymore. Warlords turned on each other, desperate to seize power, only to realize there was nothing left to rule. Entire fleets vanished, commanders abandoning their posts, fearing that the humans would come for them next. Because they knew. No fortress was safe. No army was strong enough. If the humans had killed the Imperator, the one being who had ruled unchallenged for centuries, then no one was untouchable. Planets that had been loyal to the Empire for centuries now tore down its banners, burning them in the streets. Formerly oppressed species rose up, slaughtering their imperial overlords with the same brutality the Empire had once shown them. The Empire had believed fear was its greatest weapon. Now, that same fear had turned against them. And humanity wasn't finished yet. Kane's final order. From the bridge of his warship, Kane watched the flames of the Empire flicker and die. The holo display in front of him showed dozens of high-ranking Imperial survivors, desperately trying to flee into uncharted space. Admirals. Generals. The butchers of Earth. Cowards who had given the orders to slaughter 70,000 humans in that sickening broadcast, laughing as their victims begged for mercy. They thought they could run. They thought they could escape justice. They were wrong. Kane turned to his team. Spectre, Reaper, Ghost, killers of legends, warriors who had erased entire factions with nothing but patience and a rifle. He gave a single nod. Hunt them down. No one spoke. No one needed to. They simply vanished into the dark, off to finish the mission. There would be no trials. No pleas for mercy. Only execution. The last broadcast. Before leaving the ruins of the Imperial throne world, Kane sent one final message. Not to the Empire. Not to the survivors. To the entire galaxy. The transmission played on every channel, from the richest trade hubs to the poorest colonies. Kane stood alone, his face calm, his armor still marked with the blood of the Imperator's guards. He spoke without emotion. Earth did not seek war. Your Imperator made that choice. And he paid the price. The silence lingered. Then Kane's expression hardened. If any world, any fleet, or any being ever thinks to attack humanity again. A pause. A cold promise in his next words. You will not get the chance to regret it. The screen cut to black. And the message was clear. Earth had spoken. The galaxy would listen. The nightmares begin. For centuries, the Empire had ruled with an iron grip. But now, its name was nothing more than a whisper of fear, its worlds crumbling, its fleets abandoned. And in its place, something new was born. Not an empire. Not a conqueror's throne. A legend. The legend of the humans who came from nowhere. The ones who couldn't be stopped, couldn't be bargained with. The ones who killed without hesitation and vanished without a trace. The boogeymen of the stars. Their names were never spoken in the open, only in hushed whispers behind locked doors. Children across the galaxy grew up hearing their stories. Behave, or the humans will come for you. The surviving Imperial commanders lived the rest of their short, terrified lives looking over their shoulders, wondering when the humans would finally come for them. Because Kane had meant every word. Humanity did not forgive. Humanity did not forget. And no matter how far they ran, they would never escape. One last kill. In a distant sector, far beyond the former Imperial borders, a lone Imperial warlord sat in his bunker, hidden beneath miles of reinforced alloy. The Imperator was dead. His empire was in ruins. But somehow, he had survived. For weeks, he had hidden like a rat, jumping from world to world, never staying in one place too long. He had erased all traces of his past. He had paid mercenaries, informants, spies, anything to keep him safe. And yet, he still felt it. The weight of a rifle scope on his back. The knowledge that, somewhere out there, someone was watching. Every night, he dreamed of them. The humans. Of their cold, empty eyes staring at him. Of the last words the Imperator ever heard. You should have listened. He woke up drenched in sweat, the silence of his bunker choking him. He couldn't escape it. Because deep down, he knew. One day, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year. He would wake up, turn a corner, and see them standing there. No warning. No mercy. Just a bullet, a knife, a whisper in the dark. And then, nothing. The final truth. The Empire had once believed itself invincible. The Imperator had once thought himself a god. But they had all made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And in the end, that mistake had cost them everything.